They held a funeral for me when I was 17. There was a coffin, there was a grave, there was a headstone with my name on it, and a whole village dressed in black, weeping for a girl who was not dead. I know, because that girl was me. For 20 years, I was alive in Toronto, building a life, paying a mortgage, calling home on Sundays, and in all that time, nobody told me I was dead. I found out 3 weeks ago, on the day I came home to bury my father, and found my own grave waiting for me in the compound. My name was on the headstone, Adaura Chidinma Okonkwo. My date of birth, correct to the day, and beneath it, a date of death. 20 years old. The same month I left Nigeria. I stood there with my suitcase still in my hand, the dust of the road still on my shoes, and I read my own name on cement. The way you read a word in a language you used to speak, slowly, twice, waiting for it to mean something else. Behind me, I heard my aunt come out of the house, Auntie Adaizi, my father's only sister, the woman who used to hide meat under my gari when I was small, who called me Obi Mi, my heart. I turned to her, waiting for her to laugh, to explain, to tell me this was some mistake of the mason, some other Adaura, some cousin I had forgotten. She did not laugh. She did not scream either, the way you would scream if a dead woman walked into your compound. She looked at me, the way you look at rain when the roof is already leaking, like something you prayed against and expected anyway. And she said, quietly, Adaura, you shouldn't have come back. I want to tell you this story properly, from the beginning. Because for 20 years, I thought I knew my own life. I thought I was a woman who left home young, worked hard abroad, and simply never found the right time to return. I thought the distance between me and my family was the ordinary distance of visas and money and time zones. I did not know I was a debt. I did not know that the people who loved me most had already given me away, and that everything after, every year of my life in a cold country, had been lived inside a lie they buried in the earth of our compound and prayed would never stand up and walk. My name is Adaura. This is the story of how my family buried me the first time. Stay with me, because before this story ends, you will understand why a father holds a funeral for a living child, and why, 20 years later, this village will have to bury me a second time. And this time, I will be the one holding the shovel. Let me take you back 3 weeks to a Tuesday night in Toronto. I was 38 years old. I had spent more of my life in Canada than in Nigeria, and it showed in small ways I had stopped noticing. I said sorry when strangers bumped into me. I owned a snow shovel. I ate dinner alone at a kitchen island built for 6 in a townhouse I had bought to prove something to a father who had never seen it. By every measurement my new country understood, I had done well. Senior engineer, mortgage almost finished, a Nigerian passport renewed out of stubbornness, and a Canadian one used for everything else. But there is a kind of success that feels like furniture in an empty room. You keep buying more of it, arranging it, polishing it, and the room stays empty because the person you built the room for has never once walked through the door. My father had never visited me, not once in 20 years, and I Hear me well. I had never gone home. Not for Christmas, not for my cousin's wedding, not even, God forgive me, for my own mother's burial 8 years ago. People asks me at work, at church, "You've never been back? Not once?" And I had my answers arranged like everything else in that house. Work was busy, tickets were expensive, the country was unstable. Next year, always next year. But here is the truth I never said aloud, because saying it aloud would have forced me to look at it. I was never invited. Worse than that, every time I raised it, my father talked me out of it. Gently at first. "The roads are bad this season. Wait, let the elections pass." Then firmly, and once, only once, 12 years ago, when I had already priced the ticket for my mother's memorial, his voice went somewhere I had never heard it go, somewhere cold and shaking at the same time, and he said, "Adaora, if you love me, if you have ever loved me, do not bring your face to this village." Do not bring your face. What kind of father says that to his daughter? I told myself it was shame, that he didn't want the village to see how the family had scattered. I told myself it was pride, politics, some quarrel over land that he was protecting me from. I built explanations like you build a wall, one soft brick at a time, and I lived behind that wall for 20 years. Then 3 weeks ago, on that Tuesday night, my phone rang at 2:14 a.m. Every Nigerian abroad knows that ring. The 2 a.m. call from home does not bring good news. It has never once in the history of our people brought good news. It was my elder brother in Kenya. We had not spoken in almost a year. Our calls had grown short, then rare, then ceremonial. But that night, his voice was not the voice of my brother. It was the voice of a man reading from a paper in his mind, afraid to leave the script. "Adaora, Papa is gone." I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, in a country of snow, and listened to my brother tell me that our father, Mazi Emeka Okonkwo, had died in his sleep in the village. 71 years old. His heart, they said. And then Ikenna said something strange. In the middle of grief, it slid past me. But I want you to hold on to it because everything that follows hangs on this sentence. He said, "Papa said, if anything happens to him, you should come home." He said, "Now you can come home. Now you can come home." Not "you should come home." Now. As if a gate that had been locked for 20 years had swung open the moment my father's heart stopped. As if his death was not the end of something. As if it was permission. I booked the flight before sunrise. Toronto to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Lagos. Lagos to Umuahia by road, and then the last stretch to our village, Umuala, where the tarred road gives up and the red earth takes over. 20 years, and the smell reached me before my memories did. Rain on dust, firewood smoke, ripe mango rotting sweetly somewhere. My body remembered home before my heart could decide how to feel about it. The driver turned in at our compound gate. The same gate, older now, the blue paint gone grey. And I saw the mango tree I used to climb, and the house my father built, and I felt 20 years fold up like cloth. I paid the man. I stepped down. I carried my suitcase toward the house of my childhood. And that is when I saw it. Off to the side, near the orange trees where my mother's garden used to be. A grave. Old, well kept. Someone had been weeding it for 20 years. With my name on it. Let me tell you what a person actually feels standing at their own grave. It is not fear. Fear came later. What I felt first was embarrassment. A hot, stupid embarrassment, as if I had walked into a room where everyone had been talking about me. And the talking had been going on for 20 years, and I was the last to know. "Auntie," I said, "what is this?" Adeaze did not answer. She looked past me, at the grave, and her lips moved. Not to me. She was praying. Or apologizing. To this day, I don't know which, and I don't know to whom. Then she gathered herself the way our women do, wrapped her grief tight like a second wrapper, and said, "Come inside. You are tired. We will talk." We did not talk. For 2 days, nobody in that compound talked. Oh, there were words, condolence words, logistics words. The burial committee is meeting Thursday. The canopies will arrive Friday. The whole machinery of an Igbo burial grinding into motion around me. But every time I said the word grieve, the room changed temperature. Ikena would suddenly need to take a call. Auntie Adaize would remember something on the fire. My uncle Naimeka, my father's cousin, the eldest man left in our line, would simply look at me with his old turtle eyes and say, "After the burial, Adaura, some things wait for the ground to close." Some things wait for the ground to close. In my village, elders speak in proverbs the way other people breathe. I had forgotten how much a proverb can hide. But it was not only my family, it was the village. Word had gone out that Emeka Okonko's daughter had returned from abroad, and the village came, as the village does, to greet the bereaved. But something was wrong in the greetings, and it took me a day to name it. They would not say my name. Old women who had carried me on their backs took my hand and called me our daughter from overseas. Men my father's age called me Canada. The catechist, the same catechist who baptized me, greeted everyone in the parlor one by one, and when he reached me, his hand stopped in the air for half a breath, the way your foot stops when you nearly step on something in the dark. Then he shook my hand and called me Nwai, our child, and moved on quickly and did not look at me again for the rest of his visit. And the children stared. Children stare everywhere at anything. But one evening near the gate, I heard a small girl ask her mother, in the innocent carrying voice of children, "Mama, is that the one from the grave?" And her mother slapped her hand hard and dragged her away and looked back at me with an apology on her face and something else underneath the apology. Not confusion, not curiosity, fear. That night I could not sleep, so I did what I had been circling for 2 days. I took my phone torch and went out to the grave. Someone had been maintaining it, I told you. But up close I saw it was more than maintained. It was tended. There was a ring of white chalk, nzu, drawn around it, renewed so many times over the years that the chalk had soaked into the soil like paint into wood. At the head of the grave, tucked against the stone, lay small things, a cracked plate with old kola nuts, faded strips of red cloth tied to a stick, and wax, layers of it, candle wax, Years and years of candle wax melted into the cement like the grave itself had wept and someone had never once wiped its face. 20 years someone had been coming here. In the dark, I understood. 20 years, while I sat in Toronto telling myself I was too busy to come home, someone here had been keeping an appointment with me, feeding my name, lighting candles for a living man. My torchlight moved across the headstone, and I read the dates again. And this time, my eyes caught what shock had hidden me from the first day. The date of death. I knew it. It was not just the month I left Nigeria. It was the exact day my father drove me to Lagos, the day I stood in Murtala Muhammed Airport at 17 years old with a bag, a passport I had never seen before that morning, and a father who gripped my shoulders too hard and said, "Whatever you hear, whatever anyone tells you, you do not come back until I call you." They had not buried some other Adara. They had buried me on the very day they sent me away. The village had not been greeting a returnee for 2 days. The village had been greeting a dead woman, and everyone knew it except me. I am my father's daughter, which means I was raised to swallow things. But I am also my mother's daughter, and my mother, God rest her, never swallowed anything in her life without first finding out what it was. The next morning, I called a family meeting. Me, the youngest, the one from abroad, the one with no title, summoning elders. In my culture, that alone is close to abomination. I did not care. I stood in my father's parlor, under my father's framed photograph, and I put my boarding pass on the table like evidence, and I said, "Nobody is discussing canopies or cows today. Somebody in this room will tell me why I have been dead for 20 years. Silence. The fan turned. Outside, the burial committee's generator coughed. Then my brother in Kenya stood up and walked out, just like that, walked past me, not meeting my eyes, out to the veranda and stood there gripping the railing with both hands, like the house was a ship in a storm. And that was when Auntie Adeze began to cry. And through her crying, the first piece of the truth fell out of her like a stone from a torn pocket. "It was to save you, Adaora. Obimi, everything was to save your life." Piece by piece, from her, from Uncle Enameka, from the gaps between their sentences, the shape of it emerged. The year I turned 17, I fell sick. This part I remembered, or thought I did. A fever that came and went, weakness, weight falling off me. I remembered hospital visits in Umuahia, tests, my mother's face getting older by the week. I remember that they told me it was typhoid that refused to clear, and that the plan for me to travel, the plan I thought had existed for years, was moved up because of better hospitals abroad. That was the version I had lived inside for 20 years. Here is the version my aunt gave me, shaking in that parlor. The hospitals found nothing. Test after test, nothing. I was dying, visibly dying, and no machine could say why. And in this land, when the hospital says nothing and the body says dying, families do what families have always done. They went to consult. They went in secret at night. My father, who read his Bible daily and sneered at these things all his life, that is how frightened he was. And what they heard in a shrine deep in the next town, my aunt would not fully repeat. Even now, even weeping, she kept saying only, "They told us the earth was calling you, that a debt was on your head, that you would not see 18. The earth was calling me. A debt was on my head." Whose debt? I asked. Debt of what? From where? And here, listen carefully. Here is where my aunt stopped talking. Not slowed, stopped. Her mouth closed like a gate, and her eyes went, just for 1 second, toward Uncle Namka. And that old man, who had said maybe 10 sentences since I arrived, gave me my second proverb. Adwara, when a house is on fire, you do not ask who lit the lamp. First, you carry the children out. Meaning, we saved you. Do not ask how the danger came. They told me the rest in fragments, and I will assemble it for you the way I assembled it that day, with my own hands shaking. A way out had been offered. If the earth was calling Adwara, then let the earth receive Adwara. Let the girl die in the eyes of the land and everything that watches from inside it. Declare the death, mourn the death, bury the death, a coffin with her clothes, her hair, a cloth marked with her blood. Give the grave her name in cement, so the name is anchored. And then take the living girl out of the land quietly, quickly, before anything looked too closely, and never ever let her face return to contradict the grave. That is why my sickness lifted within weeks of landing in Canada, a recovery I had spent 20 years crediting to Canadian doctors who, I now remembered clearly, had also found nothing. That is why my father never visited. Why there were no photographs of me in that parlor. I checked, a wall of family photos, and I stopped existing at 17. Why I was talked out of every return. Why my mother was buried without me. Because the whole village stood at her graveside, and a dead daughter cannot stand at her mother's grave in front of 1,000 witnesses. Your mother, Adwara whispered, carried it the hardest. To mourn a living child, to receive condolences for you year after year, and say thank you and not scream. It ate her, Adwara. That sickness they said she had, I have never believed it was only sickness. I stood in the middle of it, and the room was turning slowly around me, and I heard myself ask the only question left. And Papa knew I would find the grave. He told Ikenna, now he can come home. Why? What changed when he died? Why is it safe now? And from the veranda, without turning around, my brother Ikenna spoke for the first time that day. 4 words, in a voice like ash. It is not safe. You have to understand what I was standing in that parlor. 20 years of Canada, an engineer, a woman who measured things, who trusted things that could be measured. And every measuring instrument I owned was telling me the same comforting thing. This is not a spiritual problem. This is a human one. Follow my reasoning, because I promise you, it was good reasoning. It was excellent reasoning. That was the trap. A girl falls sick with something hospitals can't name. Fear does the rest. A consultation produces a diagnosis no one can verify. The earth is calling her. And a solution no one can question. And who benefits? I asked myself the question every investigator asks. Follow it. A declared death? A death certificate? Because there was one. Ikenna admitted it. Our father had obtained a real certificate through a doctor he knew. And what does a death certificate do in a family with land? It removes an heir. I am the second child and only daughter, and through my mother, I was entitled to specific parcels. Her family's land had passed to her, and through her, portions were designated for me. I knew this even as a teenager. It was discussed openly once, and officially, legally, I had been dead for 20 years. The dead do not inherit. I checked what I could from my phone that very night. Land registry contacts, an old castmate, now a lawyer in Omuahia. And yes, reallocations had happened. Parcels had moved. Some to the extended family, some. I saw the name and my chest went cold in the heat, into arrangements involving Uncle Nameka's branch. There it was, solid ground, no spirit required. Somebody had frightened my parent with a shrine story, used my convenient death to reorganize inheritance, and kept the fiction alive for 20 years with chalk circles and candle wax. Theater, all of it. set decoration to keep the family too afraid to look at the paperwork. My poor father had likely half discovered it at the end. That was why he said I could come home now. He wanted me to come and reclaim what was mine. It even explained the fear in the village. Superstition, planted and watered for 2 decades. I cannot tell you the relief of that theory. Relief is not even the word. It gave me back a world with rules I knew. It gave me an enemy with a face and a bank account instead of an appetite in the ground. And it gave me, this was the sweetest part, it gave me something to do. So I did what I do. I made a plan. A clean, modern, 3-part plan. 1. Reverse the death. My lawyer classmate was blunt. Madam, you're not the first person declared dead in this country for land reasons. There is a process. Affidavits, biometrics, a court appearance. You are standing here alive, the law will find in favor of your pulse. 2. Reopen the inheritance. Every reallocation made on the strength of that death certificate was voidable. We would file after the burial before I flew back. 3. And this is the part I want you to remember. Because pride never announces itself as pride. It always dresses as principle. 3. End the theater. Publicly. I decided that the grave in our compound was an insult to my parents' suffering and a monument to somebody's fraud. And that before I left this village, I would open it in front of witnesses and show everyone what was inside. An empty box, old clothes, nothing. Let the village see there was never anything in that ground but a lie, and let the fear die of embarrassment. I announced it at the family meeting the next day. I used lawyer words: exhumation, documentation, restitution. The reaction told me I had stepped somewhere deeper than paperwork. Auntie Adeze went grey, actually grey, like ash stared into her skin. Uncle Nameka stood up. First time I ever saw him move fast, and said the thing was forbidden, that a grave once closed belongs to the earth, that even a false grave is a covenant grave, and some doors once shut hold back more than air. And I looked at that old man, this elder whose branch of the family was sitting on reallocated land, delivering me poetry about doors, and I laughed. God forgive me, I laughed in the face of an elder in my father's parlor with my father not yet in the ground. Uncle, the only thing under that cement is 20 years of wickedness, and on Saturday, everyone will see it. My brother Ikenna said nothing at all. He only looked at me, and I realized now what that look was. It was not anger. It was the way you look at someone standing on a frozen lake too far out to reach, who has just told you, laughing, that the cracking sound is nothing. Saturday came. I hired the men myself. 2 laborers from outside our village because no Umola man would touch the job at any price. That alone should have told me something. Money is a powerful argument in a poor season, and I was offering a lot of it, and grown men looked at the notes in my hand and looked at that chalk-ringed grave and chose their poverty. We gathered in the late morning. I had wanted the whole village. I got perhaps 30 people, standing well back in the shade of the orange trees, silent like a congregation that suspects the sermon will go wrong. Ikenna stood at the edge, arms folded. Auntie Adeze would not come out of the house. From inside, faintly, I could hear her, not crying, chanting, praying without stopping, the same words over and over, like a woman bailing water out of a boat. The laborers broke the cement cap. It came up in grey slabs. Under it, the earth was strangely dark for our region, dark and soft, like riverbank soil, though we were nowhere near a river. They dug. The smell that came up was not decay. It was worse somehow for being pleasant. Deep, wet, fertile, the smell of a farm at planting time, rising out of a grave. 4 feet down, the wood appeared. The coffin had not rotted. 20 years in wet earth, and the wood was dark and sound. And this detail moved through the watchers like wind through corn. And 2 women left at that point, walking quickly, not running the way you leave when running would admit something. I climbed down myself for the last part. I wanted my own hands on it. The engineer gathering evidence. We raised the lid. I will tell you exactly what was inside in order as I saw it. My school uniform folded with terrible neatness. My church shoes, the buckle still fastened. A tin box I had kept coins in. An envelope of my hair. A white cloth. And on the cloth, a stain, brown black with age. And I heard Uncle Nameka's voice behind me from the graveside, very quietly. Your blood, 9 drops. It had to be 9. And in the center of it all, where the chest of a body would be, lying on my folded uniform like a sleeping thing, was an awful staff. The wooden staff of oath and lineage, older than any grief in that compound. I did not need anyone to tell me it was my great-grandfather's and then my grandfather's. Some knowledge simply rises in you when the object is before you. It was wrapped around, tightly, many times with red thread, and driven through the thread and the wood, pinning the staff like an insect on a board, was a long iron nail, hand-forged, the head worn smooth. Wrapped and nailed, bound and pinned. Not decoration, not theater. Whatever this arrangement was, it was engineering. I recognized it the way one professional recognizes another's work. Somebody had built a mechanism in this box, load-bearing, and I had just opened the housing with the machine still running. The laborers would not come near the coffin again. I paid them off. The crowd melted. Nobody said sorry. Nobody said anything. Our people know when a thing has passed beyond commentary. I stood alone at my open grave holding my own school uniform, and for the first time, my beautiful fraud theory made a sound like cracking ice. Because fraudsters cut corners. Fraudsters do theater for the living. Nobody does this. 9 drops of blood and hand-forged iron, 4 feet down where no living eye was ever meant to see, for an audience. This had been built for an audience that does not use eyes. That night, 3 things happened. I will give them to you plainly and let you weigh them as I have had to weigh them for the rest of my life. First, the wind. There was no storm that night. I have checked. You can check. The weather records exist. I told you what I am. But something moved through our compound around 1 in the morning, low along the ground. And every door in that house strained against its frame at the same moment. And the mango tree, the great one, my childhood tree, split. Not fell, split. Down its living center with a sound I felt in my teeth. Second, at almost the same hour, in his room, my brother Ikenna collapsed. His wife's scream woke the house. We found him on the floor, conscious, eyes open. And this is the detail the doctors in Umuahia could not and cannot explain. He could not get warm. In our heat, under blankets, his body shook with cold and his temperature read low and kept reading low. And every test they ran, I paid for every test that hospital could perform, came back the way my tests had come back 20 years before. Nothing. Nothing and dying. And as they carried my brother to the car, he gripped my wrist with a cold hand and pulled me down and said, not with hatred, I could have survived hatred. He said it with the terrible gentleness of a man explaining something to a child. It was sleeping, Adaura. 20 years it was sleeping on your name. You woke it up, and now it can see that the grave is empty. Third, the third thing. At dawn, grey and shaking, I went back to fill in the grave, some idea of closing what I had opened. And I found, pressed into the soft dark soil beside the open pit, marks that had not been there when we stopped digging. Footprints, bare, a man's size. They began at the edge of the grave. They did not walk toward it. They walked away, 4 steps, toward the house, toward the room where my brother slept. And then they stopped. There is a proverb my mother used to say. The chicken that runs from the cooking pot does not know it is running toward the frying pan. For 20 years, I had been running from this village, and for 1 week, I had been running around inside it, with lawyers, with theories, with a shovel. Now my brother lay freezing in a hot country, and the running was finished. A person can only be modern until 2 in the morning. After 2 in the morning, we are all our grandmothers. It was Auntie Adeze who told me where to go. Or rather, she told me who had been waiting for me to come. Nnambafo, the old one, past the stream. She served at the shrine of Allah before you were born. Your father went to her, Adaura, at the end. Every week at the end. Whatever he was preparing when his heart stopped, she is the one who knows. Whatever he was preparing. So my father's death had interrupted something. I felt the story turn beneath me like a great fish beneath a small boat. I went on foot, alone as instructed, carrying kola and a bottle of dry gin like any daughter of the soil. My Canadian passport suddenly the most useless object I had ever paid for. Her compound was swept earth, and one low house and an ancient udala tree, and she was sitting outside it when I arrived. A woman so old that age had stopped meaning anything, shelling egusi into a tray as if she had been assigned that task at the creation of the world. She did not look up. She said, "The empty grave has come to greet me. Sit down, Adaorao Kunko. You have your grandfather's stubborn head. Let us see if you have your father's heart." And there, over the next hours, shelling seeds the whole time, she gave me the last of the truth. The part my aunt's mouth had closed on. The part 20 years of candle wax had been holding down. The debt was real, but it was never mine. In the years after the war, the Biafran War, when hunger rearranged every family's arithmetic, my grandfather, Nnamdi Okonkwo, did a thing. There was a man, Okoro Uba, whose land shared a boundary with ours. Okoro did not come back from the war, and his widow came back with children and nothing else. And my grandfather, who had survived and grown shrewd surviving, moved the boundary. Not with a knife, with words, with witnesses he fed, with a hearing before the elders where he stood in the sacred grove, his hand on Ofo, and swore before Allah, the earth herself, the mother who owns the land and the dead in it, and the law between the living. Law between the living, that the disputed land had always been Okonkwo's land. He swore it falsely on the earth, while standing on her. "Understand what your grandfather did," the old woman said, and she finally looked at me, and her eyes were not cloudy at all. "She did not steal from a widow. That is only wickedness. Wickedness can be repaired. He made the earth his witness to the theft. He tied Allah herself into his lie. That is not wickedness. That is abomination. And the earth does not punish abomination the way a court punishes." She let seeds fall into the tree. 1, 2, 3. She collects it like a debt, patiently, with interest from the lineage. Because the land feeds the lineage, so the lineage owes. The Uba family scattered. The widow cursed no one. She did not need to. And the collecting began, quiet as roots. My grandfather's other children, the ones who never lived past infancy. The barrenness in one branch, the accidents in another. Old Dibias were consulted across the years and said the same thing in different ways. Return what was falsely sworn and confess the swearing, or the earth will take a daughter of your sons in place of what stands on her back. And my grandfather, stubborn head, she said again, chose a third way. He died without confessing and left the debt in the soil like a landmine. And my father inherited a farm with something buried in it that no map showed. Then I turned 17 and began to die of nothing. And my parents went consulting at night and were told what you have already heard. The earth is calling her. The collection had reached its appointed generation, a daughter of your sons. And your father, Nimgofo said, was offered the coward's medicine, and he drank it because he was not a coward about anything except losing you. Some worker of these things, not from here, your father went far, where shame could not follow, showed him how to pay the earth with paper instead of gold. Give her the name, bury the name with blood and hair and the lineage staff bound in iron, and declare the girl dead, and make the whole community's mourning water the lie until it grew roots. The earth is patient, but she is procedural. The old woman almost smiled. She collected what is filed with her, a grave with your name, sworn and mourned and fed. That is a filing. For 20 years, the case was closed. And I reopened it, I said. You reopened it, she agreed, without cruelty. The way one states rainfall. And she has seen the fraud. And a debt discovered in fraud is no longer collected with patience. She set down the tray at last. Your brother is not sick, Adara. Your brother is collateral. The name on the filing is void, so she reaches for what is nearest of the blood. First, the son who stayed, then the rest. She is not wicked. She is old. I asked the only question there was left to ask. The question I had crossed 20 years and one open grave to arrive at. How do I pay it? And Nemgafo told me what she had spent months telling my father. What my father had been preparing week by week when his heart stopped 10 days before he could finish it. The story turned fully over then, and I saw its belly. My father had not died and released me to come home. My father had died in the middle of arranging my homecoming because the payment could not be made without me. The debt was never a life, she said. Hear me, daughter of Emeka. The earth did not ask your grandfather for a child. She asked for the truth and the land. Fear always offers the wrong currency and offers it twice. What is owed is what was always owed. The false oath must be unsaid where it was said. The land must return to the blood of Okoroba. And the false grave, she pointed one ancient finger at my chest, must be emptied of its lie by the same mouth that profits from it, you, alive, before the village that mourned you. You must unbury yourself, Adara. You must stand on the earth and give her back your name and take up your grandfather's instead. I walked home in the dark and I was not afraid. I want that on the record, whatever the record is. Somewhere between her compound and ours, the fear had burnt off like morning fog, and what remained was something I had never felt in Canada, not once, not at any salary. I knew exactly what I was for. My whole life had been a woman standing in a room full of furniture, wondering why the room felt empty. It felt empty because the room was never the assignment. This was the assignment. 20 years abroad, I thought I had escaped my family's history. I had not. I had been stored by it, kept safe, kept far, kept ignorant, like the one valuable thing a burning house throws from the window. My grandfather made the debt. My father made the lie. Between them, they had spent 2 generations proving that you cannot bury what you owe. fine, I thought, and I felt my father's blood and my mother's blood agree in me. Then we will dig it up, all of it, in daylight, in front of everyone. My father's burial had been set for the following Saturday. The elders had been circling a quiet dread that no one would voice in full, whether the earth of Umola would even receive Emeka Okonkwo, whether a man could be laid into ground his family had defrauded. Burials have been refused by the land before. Our people have stories. Our people are stories. So this is what we did. And if you learn nothing else from my life, learn how this felt. We put the truth on the program between the church service and the interment. Printed, typed, bold, one line, family restitution and traditional rights. My lawyer classmate thought I had lost my mind. Perhaps I had. But my father sinned in front of witnesses. The earth was defrauded in front of witnesses. Nemugbafo was exact about this. What was done in the assembly must be undone in the assembly. Shame is part of the payment. Shame, she said, is the interest. Saturday came, and the whole of Umola came with it. Grief brings a village, but this, word of this, brought 3 villages. And when the church rites were finished, before the open grave dug for my father, I stood, a daughter, with no title, alive against all documentation, and I told them everything you have heard. My grandfather's oath, the moved boundary, the widow Uba, the consultations, the coffin with 9 drops of my blood, my mother receiving condolences for a living daughter until it killed her, my father's 20-year sentence as warden of a lie he could neither confess nor escape, and his last months walking to Nemubafo's compound week after week, an old man secretly assembling the machinery of his family's confession, dying 10 days short of the switch. I watched the crowd as I spoke. I watched old men who had witnessed my grandfather's oath 50 years ago lower their eyes into their laps. I watched people find the Uba family in the crowd with their eyes. Because yes, the Ubas came. We had gone to them on Wednesday, Ikena's wife and Auntie Adaize and I, to the grandson of Okoro Uba, a secondary school teacher in Umuahia named Chukuma, a quiet man with his grandmother's patience, and we had knelt in his parlor. An Okonko has knelt to an Uba. Let it be recorded. And told him first. At the graveside, the deed of return was read aloud. Every parcel. The original boundary restored by survey at our cost. Signed before the elders, the church, and Nnemgwafo was carried there in a plastic chair and sat like a full stop at the end of a long sentence. Before the earth herself. Chukuma Uba stood, and the assembly held its breath for bitterness. And instead, this teacher looked at the coffin of my father and said, "Our grandmother told us the land would come home when the family that took it grew a child who could carry shame in public. She said we should not fight. We should wait for that child to be born." He looked at me. Welcome back from the dead. Then we walked, all of us, the whole assembly, from my father's open grave to mine. The rite was old and it was simple, and its simplicity was the most frightening thing about it. The false headstone was broken by my hand with an iron hammer, my name coming apart in 3 pieces of cement. The coffin of my belongings was raised and unpacked in daylight, the uniform, the boots, the tin of coins laid out on white cloth for every eye, the lie inventoried item by item. The bound ofo was cut free from its red thread by Nnemgwafo's own hands, the iron nail drawn out and driven into the Udala tree by the shrine path, where such things are retired. And then the oldest form of any transaction on this earth. I stood barefoot in the open grave. Yes, in it. You do not unsay a filing from a distance. And the old woman poured a libation and called my name 3 times, and 3 times I answered, I am alive. And the assembly of 3 villages answered after me, like thunder answering lightning. She is alive. The grave was filled that afternoon, filled with the broken stone, the emptied coffin, the red thread, and at Nnemgwafo's instruction, seed yams. She said, let her have something growing. She has held something rotten long enough. And my father was buried at last. In the cool of the evening, in ground that took him, I will swear this before anyone, softly. Every shovel of earth fell like a hand patting a child to sleep. The elders noticed. Elders noticed everything. Oza men who had avoided my eyes all week came to shake my hand with both of theirs. My brother Ikenna came home from Umuahia on the following Tuesday. The cold had broken Sunday morning. The nurse's notes, which I have kept, record the time. His temperature simply returned, they said, like weather. He walked into the compound on his own legs and stood a long time at the 2 graves, our father's, fresh and flowered, and mine, filled and seeded. And then he came to me under the split mango tree. And my elder brother, who had carried the lie the longest of us all, wept into my shoulder and said the words 20 years had owed us both. Welcome home, Adaura. Welcome home. 6 weeks later, I was back in Toronto. There was work. There is always work. But some things had changed in the townhouse with the kitchen island built for 6. On my shelf, where the awards used to sit, the awards are in a box now. There is a piece of grey cement, about the size of my hand. On it, in chiseled letters, you can read 4 letters of a name. A-D-A-O. The rest of me is buried in Omoala, in a grave full of seed yams. I look at it every morning, my own headstone keeping me company. My aunt thinks it is morbid that I took it. I think it is the only honest souvenir I have ever owned. Other people bring back carvings and Ankara. I brought back the receipt. Because I understand something now that I could not have understood at the beginning of this story, when I stood in that compound with a suitcase in my hand, reading my name on cement and waiting for it to mean something else. It meant exactly what it said. There was a dead Adaura in that grave. The girl who was sent away at 17, the one who belonged to that soil, who knew which mango branch held your weight, who was owed a mother's burial and a father's blessing and 20 Christmases. They buried her and she stayed buried. And the woman in Toronto grew around her absence like the wall of a house grows around a sealed room. They buried me twice in the end. The first time in secret, in fear, with blood and iron, to hide me from a debt.
The second time, in daylight, in front of 3 villages, with libation and seed yams. And that time, we buried only what deserved burial. The lie, the fear, the stone with my name. The first burial cost my family 20 years, my mother's health, and my father's whole heart. The second one cost a confession and a piece of land. It was the cheaper funeral. It is always the cheaper funeral. Whatever your family has planted in its silence, hear an engineer who learnt it with a shovel. The truth is always the cheaper funeral. Last month, my brother sent me a photograph. The rains had come to Umuopa. In the compound, on the grave that carries no name now, the seed yams have broken the soil. Green vines climbing the stakes Ikenna set for them, growing out of the exact rectangle of earth where my name lay pinned under iron for 20 years. The earth is not wicked, the old woman told me. She only holds what is filed with her. We have filed something better now.
and my flight home for Christmas, the first Christmas, is already booked. Because my aunt was wrong that first day, standing behind me while I read my own headstone. She said, "You shouldn't have come. Auntie, Obiyomi, coming back was the only thing I ever did right."
That is the story of Adaora Okonkwo, the daughter they buried twice, and the death that waited 20 years for a plane ticket. If this story held you to the end, do one thing for me before you go. In the comments, choose your side. Team dig or leave it buried. If you were Adaora, standing at that chalk-rimmed grave with your own name on it, would you have opened it knowing what it might wake? Or are some doors better left shut? One word is enough. I read every answer. And if your own family has a story they only tell in whispers, you don't have to share the secrets. Just type, "My house has a sealed room." You will be surprised how many of us are living above one. Subscribe and press the bell. Good night, and greet your people while you still can.